I'm divorced, he told me on our second date, before I had even asked, and I have spent a long time since thinking about the fact that he offered it before I asked, and that I was so relieved to hear it that I never once, in 2 years, went looking to see whether it was true. That is the whole story, really, folded into its first 10 seconds. But let me unfold it for you properly, because the unfolding is where the lesson lives. My name is Hannah. I am 38 years old, and I am a veterinary technician in Asheville, North Carolina. I spend my days holding frightened animals still and gentle while we help them, reading the small signs of pain in creatures who cannot tell you where it hurts. I am good at reading what is wrong with the ones who cannot speak. I want you to hold that because of all the ironies in the story, it is the one that has cut me deepest. I can read a trembling dog like a book, and I could not, for 2 years, read the obvious, trembling truth about the man I loved, because reading it would have cost me the thing I wanted, and so I simply chose not to look. I should tell you where I was in my life when Daniel walked into it, because the soil matters as much as the seed. I was 36 when we met. I had come out of a long relationship that had quietly run out of road, and I had spent 2 years after it telling everyone I was fine being single, and mostly believing it, and occasionally lying awake at 2 in the morning doing the arithmetic that single women in their 30s are not supposed to admit they do. The arithmetic of time, of the life you had pictured, of the friends' wedding invitations and the baby announcements, and the slow narrowing of a thing you had always assumed would simply happen to you. I was not desperate, but I was tired, and I was lonely in a way I worked hard to hide, even from myself, and into that exact tiredness walked a warm, funny, attentive man who looked at me like I was the most interesting person at the barbecue. You have to understand how ready I was to believe a good thing. I was not a foolish woman who fell for an obvious con. I was a careful woman with one unguarded door, and that door was the size and shape of exactly the future I had stopped letting myself want out loud, and Daniel walked straight through it, because he had clearly learned, somewhere, how to find that door in women like me. His name was Daniel. I met him at a friend's barbecue, and he was easy in the way that easy men are, warm and funny and attentive, and on our second date, unprompted, he told me he was divorced. He said it lightly, with a little rueful shrug, the way you mention a healed-over thing. Amicable, he said. Just grew apart, no drama, we're better as friends now, and I believed him. Of course I believed him. He was charming and kind, and he was sitting across from me wanting me, and a divorced man was exactly the kind of man I was allowed to want. So I took the word divorced, and I put it in my pocket, and I never, ever took it back out to examine it in the light. Looking back now, the signs were not subtle. They were not even really hidden. They were simply things I declined to add up, because some part of me already knew that the sum would end everything. He could almost never stay the night. There was always a reason. Early work, a dog of his own, a long commute. And I, who do not even have a dog of my own to blame, accepted every reason without ever stacking them next to each other. He did not have me to his place. In 2 years, I was at his apartment perhaps 4 times, always briefly, always when he had clearly tidied away anything that lived there. I told myself he was private, or embarrassed about clutter. Holidays, he was unreachable. Weekends were often vague. He had 2 phones, and he told me one was for work, and I accepted that the way you accept a thing you have decided not to think about. Whole categories of his life were simply walled off, and every wall had a reasonable-sounding sign on it, and I read the signs and never once tried a door. There was the Thanksgiving he was completely unreachable for 3 days and came back vague and tired, and I told myself he had family obligations that were painful and private, and that pressing him would be unkind. There was the time I saw, for half a second before he tilted the screen away, a photo on his lock screen that was not a screensaver, a little girl on a beach, and he said it was his niece, and I said, "Oh, she's sweet," and I let it go, because the alternative to letting it go was a conversation I did not want to have. There was my friend Renee, who met him once and was quiet about him afterward in a way that was not like her, and who finally said carefully, "He seems great, I just feel like you don't really know much about his actual life." And I got defensive. I actually got defensive with my own friend on behalf of a man who was lying to me, and Renee dropped it because that is what you do when a friend has clearly already decided. Every one of those moments was a door. Every one of them had a handle. I walked past all of them with my eyes politely forward because some animal part of me already knew what was behind them and had voted, without telling the rest of me, to keep them shut. And here is the part I have had to be most honest with myself about, the part that is the actual subject of this story. I never asked. In 2 years, I never asked him a single hard question. I never said, "Where do you really go on the holidays?" I never said, "Why can't I ever reach you on a Sunday?" I never said, "What was your wife's name? Tell me about the divorce. When did it finalize? Do you have a decree?" I asked him nothing, ever, that might have made one of those reasonable signs fall off the wall. And I told myself this was trust. I told myself I was being a secure, easygoing, non-suspicious girlfriend, the kind men love, the kind who doesn't interrogate. But it was not trust. I know that now. Trust is when you ask and you believe the answer. What I was doing was the opposite of asking. I was protecting the lie, standing guard over it from my own side, because I had looked at the shape of my hopeful little life and decided I would rather keep it than know whether it was real. I have tried to explain this to people since, the not asking, and I can see them not quite believing it. How could you be with a man for 2 years and never ask him for the basic facts of his own divorce? But that is exactly backwards from how it works, and if you have ever done it, you know. It is not that I forgot to ask. It is that I could feel, very precisely, the location of every question I was avoiding, the way your tongue knows exactly where the sore tooth is and learns to chew around it. I knew where the questions were. I steered around them with enormous skill. When a conversation drifted toward his marriage, his past, his weekends, I would feel the edge of the dangerous ground coming, and I would gracefully turn us somewhere safe. And I got so good at it that it stopped feeling like avoidance and started feeling like tact. That is the trap. Self-deception practiced long enough stops feeling like deception at all. It just feels like the texture of your life, and mine had a whole region in it that I had trained myself never to walk into, and I called that region trust. It was his car that finally asked the question I would not. Daniel had bought one of those newer cars, the kind with the big screen in the dashboard and a camera that records the road, a dashcam built right in. We were going to dinner one evening, and he had run back into a store for something, leaving me in the passenger seat, and I was idly poking at the screen the way you do, and I must have opened the camera's saved files, because all at once, the speakers came on, and a recording from that car began to play. It was from earlier that same day. The camera records sound, it turns out, not just road. And what came through those speakers, crisp and ordinary and utterly devastating, was the inside of Daniel's car on a normal afternoon. There was a child's voice, a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, chattering about something from a car seat in the back, and then saying, clear as a bell, "Daddy, can we get ice cream?" And then a woman's voice, warm, familiar, exasperated in the gentle way of a wife, a woman's voice saying, "Daniel, don't forget you said you'd be home early tonight." And Daniel's voice, the voice that had told me he was divorced, the voice that had said, amicable, just grew apart, answering her, easy and loving, "I know, babe, I won't be late." I sat in that passenger seat, and the bottom fell out of 2 years of my life in about 10 seconds. I did not move to turn it off. I want to be honest about that. There was a version of me, even then, that could have stabbed at the screen and made it stop, and gone on not knowing for a little while longer, and for one cowardly half-second, I think I actually considered it. But I didn't. I let it play. I let the little girl ask for ice cream, and I let the wife remind him to come home early, and I let his easy, loving, "I won't be late," wash over me all the way to the end, because some part of me that had been gagged and bound for 2 years finally stood up in that passenger seat and said, "No, we are going to hear this. We are going to hear all of it. We have refused to know things for long enough." And so I sat perfectly still, and I listened to the sound of the family I had been helping to wreck, recorded by accident, played back by accident, the truth finally arriving the only way it ever could have, through a machine, because no person, least of all me, had ever been willing to deliver it. He was not divorced. He had a wife. He had a child, a little girl who asked him for ice cream from the back seat of this very car, the car I was sitting in, on the way to a dinner with the woman he was lying to her with. I was not the girlfriend of a divorced man. I had never been that, not for a single day. I was the affair. I was the other woman, the one wives are warned about, the one I had always, smugly, been certain I would never be, because I was a good person, and good people don't do that. Except I had done exactly that, for 2 years, and the only thing that had let me believe otherwise was a single word offered on a second date and 1,000 questions I had carefully chosen never to ask. When Daniel came back to the car, I was very calm. I have noticed that about myself in the worst moments. I go quiet and clear, the way I do with a frightened animal. I told him what the car had played. I watched his face do the thing faces do, the rapid private calculation, and then he did not even really try to deny it. He shifted straight to managing it. He said it was complicated. He said he and his wife were basically over, just staying together for their daughter, that he had meant to tell me, that what he felt for me was real. He said all the things, the entire script, and I realized as he talked that he had probably said a version of it before, that I was likely not even the first, that this was a thing he did and had gotten smooth at. But I want to be honest, because this channel is a place for the honest version, and the honest version includes my own part, and it would be a cheap story if I left that out. The lie was his. Make no mistake, the active, sustained, cruel deception was entirely Daniel's, and the deepest betrayal in this story was not even to me. It was to a wife at home and a little girl asking for ice cream, who had a husband and a father quietly dismantling their family from inside the very car that carried them. That is his to carry. But the not asking was mine. He told one lie on a second date, and then he simply relied on me to spend 2 years telling it to myself on his behalf, by refusing to ask anything that might unravel it. And I did. I held up my end of that lie faithfully, because the truth was inconvenient to a fantasy I had grown attached to. A liar can only build a life on top of you if you agree not to check the foundation. And I had agreed, every single day, by asking nothing. I got out of the car. I did not make a scene. I called a friend to come get me, and I stood on the curb in the dark, waiting, while Daniel sat in his family's car saying my name through the window in that reasonable voice. And I did not answer him because I was done being a person who accepted his reasonable voice. Standing on that curb, waiting for Renee's headlights, I felt something I had not expected to feel, underneath the shock and the shame, and it took me weeks afterward to find the word for it. It was relief. Not relief that it was over. That came later and slower. This was a stranger, simpler relief. The relief of finally being allowed to stop guarding the door. For 2 years, I had been doing invisible, exhausting work. The constant low-level labor of not knowing, the steering around, the careful not looking. And I had been so used to its weight that I had stopped feeling it as weight at all. And now, on a dark curb, it was simply gone. There was nothing left to protect. The worst thing I had been refusing to find out had been found out. And the strange thing nobody tells you is that the other side of that is not only grief. It is also the first full breath you have taken in 2 years. I stood there, and I breathed it, in the cold, while a married man said my name through a car window, and I let his voice be just a sound. I never saw him again. I blocked the number, both numbers, the real one and the work one that had never been a work one. I thought for a long time about whether to tell his wife. I want to mention that because it is the question everyone asks me. In the end, I did, carefully, with no agenda and no expectation, because after standing where I had stood, I could not be one more person who knew the truth about her life and decided it was not my place. I will not tell you how that went because it is hers, and she has had enough of strangers in her marriage. But I told her, it was the one clean thing I could do at the end of 2 unclean years, and I did it. I have thought a great deal about that wife in the months since. About the fact that, for 2 years, she and I were both being lied to by the same man, in the same car, with the same easy voice, and that the only real difference between us was that she had a ring and a daughter and a mortgage, and I had a single word offered on a second date. We were not rivals. We never had been, though the story everyone tells about the wife and the other woman is always a story of rivals. We were two women on opposite sides of one man's single sustained lie, and the lie had set us against each other in a contest neither of us had ever agreed to enter. When I finally told her, I did not feel like the villain arriving to wreck her life. I felt like one prisoner passing a note to another through a wall, telling her what I had finally figured out about the man who was holding us both. What she did with the note was hers, but I will not regret passing it, ever. Silence had already cost me 2 years. I was not going to spend it on her too. The hardest part of healing from this was not getting over Daniel. Daniel, it turned out, was easy to get over once I saw him clearly, because there was almost nothing real there to grieve. You cannot mourn a man who was never actually in the room with you, only a performance of one. The hard part was forgiving myself for the not asking. For 2 years of a willful, self-protective blindness that I had dressed up as trust, for becoming, through sheer determined incuriosity, the thing I had always judged other women for being. That took a long time, and a good therapist, and a lot of honest mornings. But I have arrived, finally, at a kind of peace with her, that woman who would not ask, because I understand now that she was not wicked, only frightened, and that her real mistake was a very human and very common one. She wanted something to be true so badly that she decided not to find out whether it was. I ask questions now. That is the thing I carry out of those 2 years, and I carry it into everything, not just love. When something matters to me, I ask the hard thing, the real thing, the question whose answer I am afraid of. Especially that one, because that is precisely the question that is load-bearing, the one whose answer would change everything, which is exactly why some frightened part of me always wants to leave it unasked. I have learned that the question you are most afraid to ask is almost always the only question that actually matters, and that refusing to ask it is not protecting anything. It is just choosing to live in a story instead of a life. If you have ever looked away from a truth on purpose, if you have ever kept a hope alive by carefully not asking the one question that would kill it, then this story is for you. One word in the comments if it found you. Asked. Just that. It is for everyone who is, right now, standing guard over a lie from their own side, protecting a comfortable story by refusing to check whether it is real, and who knows, somewhere underneath the not knowing, exactly what they are doing. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. The first, there is a kind of lie that the liar barely has to maintain because you maintain it for them. They tell it once, and then they simply count on the fact that you want it to be true, and you do the rest for years by declining to ask the questions that would bring it down. If you find yourself in a situation that requires you never to ask certain things, never to look in certain directions, never to add up the reasonable-sounding reasons and see their sum, pay attention. That carefully maintained blindness is not trust, and it is not generosity, and it is not being easy to love. It is fear wearing trust's clothes. The relationships that can survive your questions are the only ones worth not asking them in. The second, the question you are most afraid to ask is the one you most need the answer to. I knew that somewhere for 2 years. The very fact that a question frightens you, that you can feel yourself steering around it, is the surest sign that its answer is the thing your whole situation actually rests on. So, ask it. Ask the frightening one. Yes, the answer might end something, but if it ends something, then that something was already over, or was never real, and you were only the last to be told, and you were the one keeping yourself last. Better to ask and lose a comfortable story than to spend 2 years, or 20, faithfully guarding a lie that was never yours to keep. Most lies do not lie to you. They wait for you to lie to yourself by refusing to ask. So ask, especially the question whose answer you are most afraid of. I'll see you next time.